The hydraulic press screamed as it came down on empty air where my hand had been seconds before, and as I stared at Trevor's expressionless face watching from the observation deck, I knew my accidental death would have simply been another statistic to improve his precious quarterly numbers. I grew up watching my father come home from the steel mill with calloused hands and a stooped back, but there was always pride in his eyes. "Mike," he'd tell me, "a working man's value isn't in what he makes, but what he prevents." Those words became the foundation of my life at Western Plains Manufacturing. For 22 years, I lived and breathed that factory floor. The rhythmic pounding of the hydraulic presses, the acrid smell of metal being shaped by fire and force, the symphony of machines that most people found deafening but I heard as music. My office wasn't much just a glorified closet with walls plastered with safety certifications and family photos that yellowed over time. Sarah used to pack my lunch every morning. Ham sandwich, apple, and a note that said something sweet. That was back when we still had hope for our marriage, before the midnight emergency calls and missed anniversaries piled up like the scrap metal behind the loading docks. "Daddy, are you coming to my game tonight?" Cody would ask, his little league uniform already on at breakfast. "I'll try, buddy. We've got that new press installation, but I'll do my best." I meant it every time, but the factory had a way of stealing hours like a thief. The night Cody hit his first home run, I was knee-deep in hydraulic fluid, fixing a leak that could have sprayed flammable mist across half the shop floor. Sarah's voice on the phone afterward was tight with a disappointment that had become all too familiar. "He loved for you in the stands every inning, Mike. I still keep the baseball from that game in my desk drawer." Cody gave it to me anyway, his 10-year-old eyes understanding more than any kid should have to. By the time Midwest Industrial Group bought us out, I'd already missed too many dinners, too many bedtime stories. Sarah and I were sleeping in separate rooms, communicating through frosty morning exchanges and notes on the refrigerator. The divorce papers came on a Tuesday. I signed them during my lunch break, sitting alone in my office while Diego and the crew pretended not to notice the red in my eyes when I returned to the floor. "You good, boss?" Diego had asked, his own 20 years at the factory etched into the lines around his eyes. Always I'd lied. But I threw myself deeper into the work. If I couldn't be a good husband or father, I'd damn well be the best foreman Western Plains had ever seen. I developed safety protocols that became industry standards. I knew every worker by name, knew which machines liked to stick in the winter, knew exactly how many seconds it took for the emergency shuttles to engage. When Axon Partners took over, everything changed. The conference room filled with sharp suits and sharp smiles, men and women who looked at our factory as nothing but numbers on spreadsheets. Trevor Wilson, with his MBA and manicured nails, never stopped typing on his laptop during my safety presentations. "These redundancies are excessive," he'd said, scrolling through my maintenance schedules. "We need to streamline operations to meet quarterly targets." I still remember the first time he brought in the new blood, 3 kids fresh out of business school who looked at my decades of experience like it was a quaint relic. Nathan Parker was the worst of them, following Trevor around like an eager puppy, nodding at every mention of efficiency improvements and operational streamlining. "Mr. Reynolds," Nathan had said, his voice dripping with forced respect that didn't reach his eyes, "these safety checks are taking up valuable production time. We've developed a new schedule that will increase output by 14%. I'd pointed to the wall in my office, to the frame certificate marking 3,000 days without a lost time accident. "This isn't just a number, son. This is 346 people going home to their families every night with all their fingers and toes." Trevor had smiled that empty corporate smile. "We appreciate your dedication, Mike, but times change and companies must evolve." 6 weeks later, Human Resources called me in. A cardboard box they handed me barely held 22 years of memories. Security watched as I cleaned out my desk as if I might steal something after giving my life to this place. As I walked out those factory doors for what I thought was the last time, I heard the unmistakable sound of a pressure valve being pushed beyond its limits, a sound that had always set off alarms in my head. But it wasn't my problem anymore. Or so they thought. 3 weeks after clearing out my desk, I sat at my kitchen table staring at a beer that had gone warm. The clock on the microwave blinked to 17 a.m., but sleep wasn't coming. My phone lit up, Diego's name flashing on the screen. "Mike, you awake?" His voice was hushed, factory noise humming in the background. "I'm up. What's going on?" "That new kid, Parker, he's cut the maintenance schedule on the main hydraulic press. We're supposed to do full checks every 72 hours now instead of daily." My stomach tightened. That press operated at 2,000 psi, enough force to flatten a car like a pancake. "He can't do that, Diego. The manufacturer specs clearly state." "I know, boss," I told him. He said, and I quote, "The manual is just covering their liability. We've run the numbers." Diego's disgust was palpable through the phone. "They've also denied Greg's parts order for the backup safety switches, 3rd time this month." I rubbed my eyes, feeling the weight of 2 decades of responsibility that apparently hadn't ended with my termination. "Keep documenting everything," I said. "And be careful." The calls kept coming after that. Vanessa from Quality Control reported they'd reduced inspection times by half. Russell told me they were running machines 24/7 without cool-down periods. Each call dug the knife deeper, but nothing prepared me for what happened to Joey Martinez. Joey was just 23, reminded me of myself when I started eager, hardworking, with a fiancée and a baby on the way. I got the call from Greg at 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday. "Mike, it's bad." His voice shook. Joey lost 2 fingers on his right hand. The press guard failed the one-eyed flight 3 times for replacement. My blood ran cold. Jesus Christ, how is he? "In surgery, but Mike." Greg lowered his voice to a whisper. Trevor and that Parker kid showed up at the hospital with paperwork. Joey signed something while he was still drugged up on pain meds. "What kind of paperwork?" "Claiming operator error, that Joey bypassed the safety protocol." "That's bullshit, Mike. The guard failed. We all know it." I hung up and found myself standing in my living room, hands shaking with rage. I could see it all, Joey, thinking about his unborn child, probably distracted for just a second. But that's why we had safeguards. That's why I'd implemented triple redundancies. Systems to protect good people from having one bad moment cost them everything. The next morning, I drove to Joey's modest apartment complex on the east side. His fiancée, Maya, opened the door with red-rimmed eyes. Joey sat on the couch, his right hand wrapped in thick gauze, face ashen. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, attempting to stand. "Stay seated, son." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "I heard what happened. They said it was my fault." His voice cracked. "That I didn't follow procedure." Mike crossed her arms. "They had him sign something while he was barely conscious. Now they're saying workers' comp only covers partial benefits because he was negligent." I sat across from them, leaning forward. "Joey, I need you to tell me exactly what happened." As he spoke, I made notes in the small pad I'd carried in my shirt pocket for 22 years. The press guard had slipped exactly as Greg had predicted it would in his denied maintenance requests. The emergency stop had activated a full second later timing issue I'd flagged before my departure. "They aligned to you, Joey, and I'm going to prove it." That night, I spread everything out on my dining room table, all the calls, texts, and emails from my former team, systematically documenting the dismantling of safety protocols I'd spent decades building. I added Joey's account, photos Greg had secretly taken of the faulty equipment, and maintenance request denials. The pattern was unmistakable. They were sacrificing safety for speed, human lives for production numbers. My phone buzzed with another text from Diego. New memo. Maintenance hours cut by 30%. Safety training reduced from 4 DHRS to 8. They're killing us, Mike. I stared at that text for a long time, something hardening inside me. In that moment, I remembered my father's calloused hands, the pride in his eyes when he told me a working man's value was in what he prevented. "Not this time," I whispered to my empty house. "Not on my watch." I reached for my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in years, Heather Thompson, Senior Safety Inspector. Then I pulled out another notebook and began mapping out exactly how I would bring Trevor Wilson's house of cards crashing down around him. Sometimes revenge isn't about getting even. Sometimes it's about protecting what matters, the people who still trust you to watch their backs, even when you're no longer standing beside them on the factory floor. The morning of the safety board inspection, I sat in my truck across from Western Plains Manufacturing, watching Inspector Heather Thompson's government-issue sedan pull into the visitor's parking space. My hands trembled slightly as I clutched a manila folder stuffed with 23 documented safety violations, each one a ticking time bomb. My phone buzzed. "Greg, they're scrabbling. Parker's having maintenance slap guards on everything. Too little, too late." I'd spent 3 sleepless weeks building my case: photographs, maintenance logs, timestamps, witness statements. Joey Martinez's medical records sat on top, his signature on that bullshit liability waiver still making my blood boil every time I looked at it. The factory's massive sealed door swung open as I approached, the familiar smell of machine oil and metal shavings hitting me like a punch to the gut. For 22 years, that smell had meant home. Trevor Wilson stood in the lobby, his usual smug expression replaced by something closer to panic. Nathan Parker hovered behind him, looking like he might vomit. "Mike," Trevor extended his hand, which I pointedly ignored. "This is unexpected. We are in the middle of an inspection today." "I know," I replied. "I called it." The color drained from his face. "Mr. Reynolds," Inspector Thompson nodded professionally. "Shall we begin the tour?" Trevor stepped between us. "Now hold on, as I was explaining before you arrived, we've had some recent upgrades to our—" "Save it," I cut him off. "Show her the main hydraulic press first." Parker's eyes widened. "Sir, that area is temporarily—" A deafening alarm cut through the air, followed by shouts from the factory floor. My stomach dropped. I knew that alarm. Critical pressure failure. We rushed through the doors to find chaos. Workers scrambling, emergency lights flashing. The massive hydraulic press, the same one that had taken Joey's fingers, was making a high-pitched whine that sent chills down my spine. "Everybody back!" I shouted. falling into my old role without thinking. Diego hit the main breaker. Greg, pressure release valve. They moved instantly, responding to my voice like we'd never been apart. Trevor stood frozen, useless, as Parker fumbled with his tablet. The system's locked up, Greg shouted. Pressure still building. Memories flashed through my mind to Sarah begging me not to work another weekend, Cody's baseball games I'd missed, Joey's bandaged hand. 22 years of sacrifice for this place, for these people. Override code 5-4-9-1 Delta, I called out. That won't work, Parker stammered. We changed all the pressure gauge needle edged into the red. At 2500 psi, the seals would blow, sending superheated hydraulic fluid spraying across the factory floor like napalm. Everybody out. Trevor finally found his voice. Clear the floor. But I was already moving toward the press control panel, shoving past Parker. The manual release under the south panel, I shouted to Greg. It's still there, isn't it? He nodded. Never replaced it. What manual release? Parker asked, confusion written across his face. My hands worked from muscle memory, unscrewing the access panel while Greg handed me tools without being asked, just like old times. Something you wouldn't know about, I growled, because it's not in any manual. It's knowledge passed down from person to person, the kind you can't get from a goddamn spreadsheet. The gauge hit 2300 psi. Mike, Diego's voice was tight. We're running out of time. I yanked the panel off, revealing a crude mechanical lever, my own addition after the flood of 8 had knocked out electrical systems for 3 days. Reynolds, Inspector Thompson, stood at my shoulder, her voice steady despite the danger. Is this modification documented anywhere? No, ma'am, I grunted, wrenching the lever downward with all my strength. But it works. Press shouted, then went silent as pressure began dropping. Collective sighs of relief echoed through the factory. I straightened up, meeting Trevor's eyes across the floor. The factory workers had formed a semicircle behind me. Diego, Vanessa, Russell, Greg, a wall of solidarity. That, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, is just one of 23 critical safety issues I've documented since you fired me. I handed the folder to Inspector Thompson, who began flipping through it with increasingly raised eyebrows. These are serious violations, she said. Multiple willful negligence citations. This is absurd, Trevor sputtered. Parker, explained how. I can't, Parker interrupted, his voice surprisingly firm. He walked over to stand beside me. Because Mr. Reynolds is right, I've been trying to tell you for weeks that we're pushing these systems beyond safety tolerances. The silence that followed was deafening. You know what my father told me about working in factories? I said, looking around at the faces of people I protected for decades. He said the measure of man isn't how much he produces, it's how many people make it home because of him. I turned to Trevor. You can chase your quarterly profits all you want, but these are people's lives you're gambling with, and that's a bet I won't let you make. As Inspector Thompson flipped through the final pages of my documentation, the factory floor remained unusually quiet. The near disaster had left everyone shaken, but something else hung in the air, a tension I couldn't quite place. Trevor, a word. A sharp voice cut through the silence as a tall woman in an impeccably tailored suit strode across the floor, flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize. Trevor's face twisted into something between terror and forced politeness. Miss Blackwood, this isn't a good time. I can see that. Her cold eyes surveyed the scene, lingering on the disabled press, the gathered workers, and finally settling on me. Mike Reynolds, I presume? I nodded, unsure how she knew my name. Catherine Blackwood, Axum Partners Sea Oil. She extended her hand. Your reputation precedes you. My blood ran cold. The corporate shocks had arrived earlier than expected, probably to contain the damage once word got out about the inspection. Miss Blackwood, I started, squaring my shoulders. I've documented 23. 26, actually, Parker interrupted, stepping forward with his own folder. I've been keeping my own records. He turned to me, his expression a mix of guilt and determination. I've been trying to get them to listen for months. The floor went dead silent. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. I stammered, decades of factory know-hows having trained me to hide my shock. You've been documenting the violations? Parker nodded. I emailed Corporate Weekly. When they stopped responding, I started building my own case. He glanced nervously at Trevor. They brought me in to cut costs, but not like this, not by gambling with lives. A memory flashed Parker arguing with Trevor 3 weeks ago, something I'd glimpsed through the office glass but dismissed as budget talk. The directive to remove the backup hydraulic system came directly from above, Parker continued, handing his documentation to Inspector Thompson. I refused to sign off on it. Trevor, Blackwood's voice cut like steel, is this true? Trevor's face had gone from pale to crimson. Catherine, these modifications were essential to meet the quarterly targets you set. You specifically said to trim the unnecessary redundancies. I meant office supplies and administrative bloat, she snapped, not critical safety systems in a high-pressure manufacturing environment. The realization hit me like a truck. I'd been fighting the wrong battle. Parker wasn't the enemy, he was another pawn, a sacrificial buffer between workers and the real decision-makers. Actually, Parker said quietly, pulling out his phone, I have a recorded meeting where you specifically instructed me to ignore Mr. Reynolds' safety protocols. He looked at me. I knew they were setting me up to take the fall if anything went wrong, so I protected myself. The recording played clearly through his phone speaker, Trevor's voice unmistakable as he ordered Parker to gut the redundant systems and disregard Reynolds' excessive precautions. Catherine Blackwood's expression darkened. Trevor, my office is receiving your resignation letter within the hour. You can't. Trevor started. I just did. She turned to me. Mr. Reynolds, it appears we've made a catastrophic error in judgment, one that nearly cost lives today. I stood there thunderstruck, as everything I thought I knew rearranged itself. The kid I'd resented for months had actually been fighting the same battle just from inside enemy lines. Parker extended his hand to me. I've been trying to live up to your standards since day one. These people needed you. I was never meant to replace you just to be the fall guy when it all went wrong. I watched as Inspector Thompson closed his folder with a solemn nod. I've seen enough. This facility will undergo a complete safety audit, effective immediately. Catherine Blackwood's gaze swept across the factory floor, calculating losses and liabilities with each glance. Mr. Reynolds, Axon Partners would like to offer you. No, I said, the word hanging in the air between us. After 22 years of bending to corporate demands, saying that single syllable felt like breaking free from invisible chains. You haven't heard the offer, she replied, her perfectly manicured eyebrows arching slightly. I don't need to. I gestured toward the workers gathered nearby. These people aren't numbers on a spreadsheet. They're fathers, mothers, sons and daughters who deserve to go home with all their fingers and limbs intact. 3 days later, the fallout was nuclear. News vans lined the parking lot as state inspectors combed through every inch of Western Plains. Trevor had been escorted from the building in full view of the workers he'd endangered. His face, ashen and vacant, told the story of a man whose shortcuts had finally caught up with him. On the 5th day, my phone rang. An unknown number. Mike Reynolds, I answered, my voice gruff from lack of sleep. Mr. Reynolds, Daniel Blackwood, Axon Partners' newly appointed operations director. The voice was steady, authoritative. I'd like to discuss your return to Western Plains. I laughed at the sound bitter even to my own ears. Return? I don't think so. 30% salary increase, Director of Safety Operations, full autonomy over safety protocols. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the calendar where Sarah had once marked our anniversary dates I'd missed too many times. The irony wasn't lost on me that corporate was now begging for the dedication that had cost me my marriage. I don't want a job, I said finally. I want a consulting contract. Triple my former hourly rate. No quarterly budget constraints on safety measures. I now want Parker kept on with a promotion. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he finally said. 2 weeks later, I walked back through those factory doors. Not as an employee, but as something more powerful, the man who couldn't be ignored anymore. Diego met me at the entrance, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. The prodigal foreman returns, he joked, clapping me on the shoulder. Not exactly, I said, watching as workers nodded respectfully as I passed. Some reached out to shake my hand. Others simply mouthed thank you. In the break room that afternoon, I found Parker poring over maintenance logs, his sleeves rolled up, a smudge of grease on his cheek. Never thought I'd see you get your hands dirty, I remarked, pouring myself a cup of coffee. He looked up, startled. Mike, I've been meaning to thank you. For what? You're the one who kept those recordings. For showing me what matters. He closed the logbook. My professors never taught us that financial efficiency without human consideration isn't efficiency at all. It's just theft, stealing safety, stealing futures. I thought about the 22 years I'd given this place. The birthdays I'd missed with Cody. The anniversaries Sarah had celebrated alone. For years, I believed my sacrifice was the price of keeping everyone safe. But watching this kid barely older than my son, I realized maybe there was another way. That night, for the first time in years, I called Cody. When he answered, surprise evident in his voice, I didn't talk about the factory or my vindication. I've been thinking about that fishing trip I promised you when you were 12, I said instead. Better late than never? The pause nearly broke my heart. Yeah, Dad, he finally said. Better late than never. As I walked the factory floor the next morning, I watched the presses stamp metal with the rhythmic precision that had been the soundtrack to my life. The safety guards were back in place. The hydraulic systems properly maintained. The emergency protocols posted and practiced. But this time, I wasn't giving the factory my life. I was giving it my expertise on my terms. 4 days a week. No holidays. No weekends. Because the most important lesson wasn't proving my worth to Western Plains, it was recognizing my worth beyond it. Shriver had lost everything chasing quarterly numbers. I'd nearly lost everything protecting people from those numbers. Now, as I checked the safety locks on the main press, the very one that had nearly killed a man, I realized true victory wasn't getting my old job back. It was finding a way to do what mattered without sacrificing what mattered most. I looked out over the factory floor, watching workers move with confidence beneath properly maintained equipment. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent decades believing sacrificing my personal life was the only way to protect these people. Now I'd found a better path. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying those who wronged you. It's about forcing them to recognize what they carelessly discarded. But the real victory? Learning my own worth wasn't tied to this building or that paycheck. As I watched Diego train a new hire on proper lockout procedures, I felt something I hadn't in years: pride without exhaustion. Freedom without compromise. The factory had taken enough of my life. My son was waiting for that fishing trip, and this time, nothing would stop me from being there. You didn't win by getting your job back, I whispered to myself. You won by finally understanding what's worth fighting for and what's not worth losing.